Chapter 12 of School Days According to Humphrey. Chapter 12, Hickory Dickory Dock. Friday morning, I was tired and a little jumpy because I thought Miss Brisbane might be upset that I mixed up her cards. I was also worried about Harry. All week long, I held my breath after every bell, wondering if Hurry Up Harry would be tardy or not. After all, he'd made a deal with Mrs. Brisbane. He did unsqueakably well at keeping his end of the bargain. But on Thursday, he had been late to school because his mom couldn't find her car keys. They were under the kitchen table. I wasn't sure whether he'd broken his end of the deal or not, so I still didn't know whether I'd be spending the weekend. But I forgot about everything else when Mrs. Brisbane said, "Boys and girls, I'm now going to announce your new classroom jobs." She explained Brisbane's buddies and how the students would work in pairs. Then she described each job. Finally, she began to read off the names of the students who would share each job. For homework collectors, Rosie and Phoebe. Miss Brisbane looked surprised, and I knew why. The night before, I'd moved Phoebe to the homework job. Helpful Holly raised her hand. "Don't you think I should do that job with Rosie?" "No," Miss Brisbane said. "I have another job for you. Holly, just keep listening." Holly looked disappointed, but Miss Brisbane continued, "Animal handlers will be Joey and Kelsey." Again, Miss Brisbane looked surprised. I just hoped that Be Careful Kelsey would be better at taking care of animals than she was at taking care of herself. Joey and Kelsey both looked thrilled. "It's really the best job," I squeaked to Og. "Boing, boing," he agreed. "Door and line monitors will be..." Miss Brisbane paused. She obviously knew these weren't the names she'd chosen, but she read them anyways. "Harry and Simon." I thought that pairing Hurry Up Harry and Slow Down Simon was a brilliant idea. At least I hope so. Miss Brisbane kept going. I thought maybe she'd ignore my next idea, but when she read the names, she actually looked pleased. Bulletin board designers, Paul G. and Paul F. The two Pauls did not look thrilled, but I crossed my toes and hoped my idea would work. When she got to the very end of the list, there were just two people left. These jobs just have one person," she said. "Thomas, you'll be the class reporter. That means you have to record what we do every day in the class log," she explained. "What we study, who participates, and even what the temperature is. No exaggerations, okay?" "Okay," Thomas said, and he gave her a thumbs up. "Holly, you will be the teacher's assistant. That means when I need anything done, from taking a note to the office to answering the phone or cleaning the board, I will ask you. Do you think you can handle that?" Helpful Holly did. Near the end of the day, Mrs. Brisbane made another announcement. Hurry Up Harry would be taking me home for the weekend. "Yes!" Harry shouted. "This is my lucky day." I hoped it was my lucky day, too. I was tired from all the late night working, rearranging the cards, but the classroom hamster sometimes works around the clock, and I was anxious to get to Hurry Up Harry's house and meet his family. I had to wait a while, though, because Harry's mom was unsqueakably late in picking us up from school. Yep, I had my work cut out for me again. Harry's mom was nice. So was his little sister, Susie. I wasn't surprised at all. After all, Harry was nice. He was also often late. And I wanted to find out why. I got all settled on the coffee table in the Ito family living room. "Nice mouthy," Susie said as she leaned in close to the cage. "Nice hamster," I politely corrected her. "Mouth," she said, twirling in circles around the cage until I felt slightly dizzy. "He's a hamster," Harry corrected her. Thank goodness. Susie twirled around again, but this time she said, "Hamster." At least that's a little closer than mouth. Usually when I go home with a student, I'm placed on a desk or table, admired and played with, and then the family has dinner. At Harry's house, I was placed on a table, admired and played with, but dinner was a long way off. I can't say that the Ito family didn't have a clock. They had a large gold one in the living room, on the mantel above the fireplace, directly opposite from my spot on the table. I saw the time change from 6 o'clock to 6:30, and from 6:30 to 7, Each time the clock reached the half-hour point, it chimed a lovely, loud sound. Ding, 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 ding. "Mommy, I'm hungry," Susie said. She stopped twirling and plopped down on the sofa. "Sorry, honey," Harry's mom said. "I was hoping we'd all eat together, but I'll go ahead and give you some pasta." "Pasta, pasta, pasta," Susie said, jumping up and twirling around my cage again. Harry decided to wait to eat until his dad came home, which was around 8:30. "Sorry," Mr. Ito said, giving Harry's mom a kiss, which was unsqueakably nice. "I was clearing up some paperwork and I lost track of time," he said. The Itos lost track of a lot of time. Harry's mom said it was no problem, and it was 9 o'clock when she finally said the food was ready. Susie had fallen asleep on the sofa, but the rest of the family ate together. After dinner, Harry's mom took Susie up to bed, and Harry and his dad came into the living room. "Wow, I didn't know it was so late," Mr. Ito said, looking up at the large, shiny gold clock over the fireplace. "It's bedtime for you too, Harry." "Oh, Dad, it's Friday night. Can't I stay up a little longer?" Harry asked. Harry's dad said it was okay, especially since he'd gotten home late and hadn't had much time with his son. They started playing a game together. I decided to entertain them with some hamster acrobatics. I leaped around on my tree branch, then hopped on my wheel and started spinning faster and faster. "Go, Humphrey, go!" Harry said, and pretty soon he and his father forgot about their game and watched me. "Tomorrow we'll put him in his hamster ball," Harry told his dad. When Harry's mom came back downstairs, I started my act all over again. I was already tired from the night before, but a hamster's job is never done. Mrs. Ito glanced up at the clock. "Harry has a soccer game in the morning," she said with a yawn. "We'd better get to bed." Mr. Ito looked up at the clock too. "My watch is a little slow," he said, resetting it. "Are you sure the clock is right?" his wife asked. "Very sure. It may be an antique, but it keeps perfect time," Mr. Ito answered. Mrs. Ito nodded, then adjusted her watch too. After Harry and his parents had gone to bed, I was happy to settle in for a nice snooze myself. Like the Itos, I checked the clock. It was 11. The next morning, I sat in my cage in the living room and watched the Itos in action. There was the usual morning commotion of people getting up, eating breakfast, and listening to the news. Harry came into the living room to see me. "Hi, Humphrey. Did you have a good sleep? Do you like my house?" he asked. I was about to say yes when Mrs. Ito rushed into the living room looking frantic. "Harry, you've got to get dressed. The game is at 9, she said. It was only 15 minutes before 9, and Mrs. Ito was still in her robe. "What time is the game?" Mr. Ito asked, wandering into the living room, still in his robe too. 9, Mrs. Ito told him. As she headed for the stairs, Mr. Ito was right behind her. Harry came back down in his soccer uniform at 5 minutes before 9. I crossed my toes and hoped that the soccer field was close to the house. Finally, Mr. and Mrs. Ito came back into the living room fully dressed. "Where's Susie?" Mr. Ito asked. Mrs. Ito ran back upstairs. "I'll get her dressed. Meet you in the car." Mr. Ito looked at the clock and shook his head. It was 1 minute before 9. "Okay," he said, "but we're going to be late." The last Ito finally left the house at 3 minutes past 9. They were definitely late, as usual. I was exhausted from watching the family run around like that, but I realized that this was a problem that went on in the Ito house every day, and that's why Harry was late for school. Mr. and Mrs. Ito were grown-up human beings and seemed quite smart. How could a small hamster help them change their ways? I thought about that problem all day, between naps in my cage. Then an idea began to take shape in my brain. The Itos weren't very good at keeping track of time, but when they did, they seemed to check that clock on the mantle. I couldn't change the Itos, but maybe I could change the clock that they trusted so much. As I stared at the clock a long time, a little rhyme rolled into my brain. Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock. Susie had called me a mouse. At least I think that's what she meant by mouth. And hamsters are a lot like mice, according to Aldo. We're both rodents. So if a mouse could go up a clock, I guess a clever hamster like me could too. As long as I had a plan. I rested some more while the Edos were gone, knowing I had a busy night ahead of me. Once the family was back from the game, Harry's team won. Yay! I learned that the Edos were really fun as long as they didn't have to worry about time. Harry showed Susie some of his soccer moves in the backyard. Then they all went out for a while and came back with lots of yummy food. Later, Mr. and Mrs. Edo cooked a big dinner, and Harry and Susie helped, and they gave me carrots. After dinner, they all went downstairs to the basement, and Harry brought me along. I was glad he did, because I got to sit in my cage and watch the family play table tennis. They didn't play tennis with a table. They played it on a table, using a small bouncing ball and paddles. Susie was too young to play, but they gave her a paddle and let her try. Harry and his parents were very good at hitting the ball back and forth on the table, with a little net going down the center. The game was quite exciting, and my neck got tired from turning my head back and forth, following the ball as it traveled. "Hey, maybe Humphrey would like to play," Harry said. I shivered and quivered a little bit, worried that the Edos were going to bat me back and forth with paddles. But Harry had a better idea. First, he put blankets all around the edges of the table so I wouldn't fall off. Then he placed me inside my hamster ball and set me on the table. "Go for it, Humphrey," he said. The Etos all leaned in and watched as I rolled my ball across the table toward the net. I was able to pick up quite some speed. As I hit the net, I bounced off, just like the little white ball. "Score 1 for Humphrey," said Harry. "Let's give him a point every time he bounces off the net." I don't mean to brag, but I scored 10 points before Harry's mom said she was tired and needed to go to bed. She was tired. What about me? But I still had lots of work to do. Once I was alone in the living room, and the house was completely quiet, I opened the lock that doesn't lock and slid down the leg of the coffee table. The moon shone through the big double doors, and I could see that there was a set of metal shelves next to the fireplace. The shelves were spaced close together, which was a lucky break for me because I could easily climb up and hop onto the mantel. I haven't had any experience with clocks, but I hoped that I could figure out how this one worked. It was an old-fashioned clock with numbers and hands, not the kind with lighted numbers. The time was exactly 11:25. There was no way to set the time on the front of the clock, so I moved around to the back. There was a knob there, which I figured must be for setting the time. I reached up and began to turn the knob to the right. The thing didn't budge. My plan wasn't going to work. I sat back down on the mantel and rested. "Wait a minute, Humphrey," I squeaked softly to myself. You turned off Rockin' Aki. Surely you can turn this little knob." I felt very determined as I leaped up and grabbed onto the top of the knob with all my might. I didn't weigh very much, but I hoped that if I could hang on long enough, I'd be heavy enough to move the knob. I shimmied my body over to the right and tried to yank the knob down. Oof! The knob budged a little bit. Ding, 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 ding. Suddenly, the chimes rang out. I dropped back to the mantel. Ding, 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 ding. The chimes were so loud, it felt as if they were ringing in my brain. It was enough to give me a huge hamster headache. Still, I had a plan, and nothing was going to stop me. The ringing stopped, so I leaped up again, hung on for dear life, and the knob moved a little more. I let go then, scurried around front and checked the time, and then returned to the back to move the knob again and again. My paws were aching. When I went around to check the front of the clock again, I saw that I had set the clock ahead 5 minutes. I was afraid to set it too far ahead when the Edos might catch on, but maybe 5 minutes would make a difference. Feeling unspeakably pleased with myself, I looked for a way back to my cage. The thought of climbing down the wire shelves made my stomach a little queasy, but on the other side there was a window with curtains and a long cord hanging down. Perfect. I grabbed onto the cord and began to slide. Eek! I hadn't realized that this cord would be so slippery. I slid way, way, way faster than when I slide down the cord to the blinds in room 26. The room was a blur as I zoomed down to the floor, which I hit a little harder than I would have liked. Once I recovered, I looked at the clock. It was 11:45 by then. Of course, I knew that it was really 11:40. I was so glad I know how to tell time. I had another lucky break when I got back to the coffee table. There was a footstool next to it, and I climbed up easily and hopped back onto the table and into my cage. I was never so happy to crawl into my sleeping hut as I was that night. And to think, at that moment, Og was alone in room 26, just swimming around in his tank. The next morning, I was a little sore, but anxious to see if all my hard work would pay off. It was a little later in the morning when, again, there was a lot of running back and forth through the living room at 9:45. "We'll be late for church," Miss Ito said, walking into the room in her robe. "I'm all set," Mr. Ito answered, and he strolled in, completely dressed for the day. "You make sure the kids are ready. I'll go get dressed," Mrs. Ito said. Mr. Ito disappeared, and I could hear footsteps upstairs as the whole family hurried around. They finally reappeared in the living room again, dressed for church. "Oh no, we're going to be late again," Mrs. Ito said, looking at the clock. "Only 5 minutes late," her husband said. "Let's go." When they left, I looked up at the clock. It said it was 5 minutes to 10, but I knew it was really 10 minutes to 10. The Itos would probably make it to church on time. Barely. The rest of the day was quiet, quiet, quiet. I was dozing when Harry came and picked up my cage. "Come on, Humphrey," he said. "You can help me with my homework." "Eek!" I squeaked. I wasn't upset about homework. I was upset because I didn't want to end up in Harry's room for the night. I already had a plan to give the Itos a little more help. Thank goodness, when Harry was finished, he carried my cage back downstairs to the table in the living room. My plan was safe. When the house was quiet that night, after the clock chimed 11, I opened the door to my cage, took a deep breath, and once again headed up the wire shelves to the mantel. With great effort, I turned the clock forward another 5 minutes. That would give the Itos an extra 10 minutes in the morning. Hopefully, the next morning, I wouldn't be tardy, and neither would Harry. Humphrey's rules of school. Homework can be extremely tiring, especially if you're a classroom pet. Chapter 13 is called Brisbane versus Becker. Read it later. Bye, guys.